Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where it seems that the scariest thing about it is how good its box office numbers are going to be, because the Thursday night numbers are in and they're already breaking records. Now, the September records aren't that impressive, and it looks like it is going to shatter them. But get this, it actually beat out Deadpool for the best Thursday night debut for an R-rated film. Oh, that's a good way to start a weekend. 12.7 was Deadpool's number, and it pulled in 13.5. But Deadpool's opening weekend seems safe. The biggest opening ever for an R-rated film with 132.4 million. But it is looking, remember, some of you said that the $70 million prediction that was floating around was a little bit too optimistic. Well, now it looks like it's going to hit 90 and maybe even 100. Easily the biggest horror film debut of all time. Easily the biggest September debut of all time. Previously, a record currently held, but not for long, by Hotel Transylvania 2 with 48.4 million. And this could be the beginning of a wonderful September for Hollywood after one of their worst Augusts and summers ever. They're definitely in the middle of a box office drought, but I think it might be raining. Warner Brothers is making it rain, and some other studios as well, because right after it, we have, and it, of course, will continue to play in theaters, will do very well. And if now everybody who's not going to go opening weekend, and some of you might be like, damn, I better buy my tickets right now. But there will be another wave of people once it hits that 90 to 100 million opening who go, maybe I should see this movie. But you've got American Assassin coming, Mother. Mother should be very afraid. Kingsman 2, Ninjago, and maybe American Made from Tom Cruise. Who knows? Maybe it'll benefit from people being like, I'm having such a good time at the movies. Maybe I will see Tom Cruise's latest, even though I still remember The Mummy. Yeah, The Mummy was bad. But anyway, I thought it had its moments. But, Warner Brothers has already started to lock down the talent for the sequel. They just signed a deal with one of the writers from this first script to do the sequel, and look for Andy Muschietti and his producing sister, they're a duo, to get a big pay bump and to be locked down pretty soon as well. And then there's the rest of the producing team, which also needs to finalize a deal. They're all awaiting deals, but I suspect that Warner Brothers will want to, although who knows, you would think Wonder Woman 2 would be moving along a little faster, but we're still waiting on Patty Jenkins' deal. She should maybe sign it up pretty fast, because Warner Brothers will be like, well, hold on, Patty, now we have to secure it too. Because I think, remember Wonder Woman opened around the same number, right? I don't think it's going to make anywhere near what Wonder Woman did, but who knows? This is certainly a new type of horror film. But they're going to want to nail down a release date for the It sequel, so they need to get all the talent in place. We were just this week on Movie Math talking about the importance of brands for studios, and that Warner Brothers and Disney are really leading the pack in terms of that kind of business model. But Disney has more brands than Warner Brothers does. But Warner Brothers is aggressively trying to, establish their own, wealth of brands. And, they have The Conjuring already, but, I talked about the fact that Disney has a better, foothold in animation with both Disney Animation and Pixar. But it looks like Warner Brothers might be able to carve out their own unique niche with horror. Because again, The Conjuring, and now potentially a Stephen King brand, if they can lock that down. And that's great. I really do feel that Warner Brothers, and I talked about this with the villain angle when I was talking recently about Disney owning Star Wars and Marvel, and how they can't have those franchises go there because of their family image as a company. So Warner Brothers, I think, should really capitalize on the fact that they can go there, which is something I think they are doing with the DCEU to a degree, and now also by developing these amazing horror brands. Very exciting for the business. Talk about an injection of cash and optimism. All right, so for the next two stories of the day, it's going to be a tale of two directors, one right for the gig, one wrong. You might disagree with me, or you might feel the reverse, but I feel pretty strongly about this. And the one that's wrong for the gig, in my opinion, is Gavin O'Connor, who is going to be writing and directing Suicide Squad 2. Now, some of you might be like, Grace, you're crazy. Or, what are you talking about? Didn't you love The Accountant? Don't you constantly sing its praises? I do. And Gavin O'Connor directed that film, but he didn't write it. And after watching Ozark, which was co-created and co-written by Bill Dubuque, who wrote The Accountant, I think it's pretty clear that Bill Dubuque is the real talent when it comes to The Accountant. So with all due respect to Gavin O'Connor, who certainly a professional filmmaker, I don't have tremendous faith that he's going to bring that same special sizzle to Suicide Squad 2. And when you look at his previous films, he just seems remarkably similar in tone to David Ayer. He even kind of looks like David Ayer. But, you know, Warrior, Pride and Glory, these are like gritty, you know, crime movies. And I think that Warner Brothers, I understand their decision saying, hey, with Gavin O'Connor doing this, we're going to get a sequel that's going to be strikingly similar to the first film. Because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And, you know, I think a lot of us would say, but it is broke. It's horribly broke. But they're like, not at the box office, so we don't want to mess with it. We just want to continue on this path until, you know, it doesn't make any money, and then we'll fix it. And you're like, oh, Warner Brothers, why do you keep doing this to yourself? You're so hard to defend. But I will say that in Gavin O'Connor's plus column, at least he wrote and directed Tumbleweeds and didn't write Jane Got a Gun, so maybe he'll do a little bit of a better job with Harley Quinn. I knew David Ayer was going to, well, David Ayer, to be fair, did a fabulous job reinventing Harley Quinn visually. That caught on like fire, and of course Margot Robbie did a good job portraying her. But in terms of the writing and the portray, you know, and the way, the depth of the character, I knew it was going to be bad because David Ayer's never written a single good female character in his life. And I'm so interested to see how he handles a film of all female characters with Gotham City Sirens. I can't believe he's still on that. But, you know, at least Harley will be in slightly better hands with Gavin O'Connor. But to be perfectly honest with you, I am just deeply disappointed that Mel Gibson didn't take this gig. He was one of the first people that, early days that Warner Brothers offered this to. He felt, he didn't really know the source material well enough, and it never came together. And I think that it would have been something special that elevated everyone and the material. But the fact that Mel Gibson, it's a rare offer for him to come back into mainstream Hollywood that he shouldn't have turned down. And I'm just, again, really, really disappointed about it. Maybe the actors wouldn't act with, didn't want to be in a Mel Gibson movie, but Hacksaw Ridge did so well and was so well received by the public. And Daddy's Home has a lot of traction. Maybe the mainstream public is ready to forgive Mel Gibson. So I think that's just really unfortunate. And I know they have the standalone division they're creating that has like these more artistic DC movies that they're going to make. But I would hate to think that meant that the core movies no longer have high standards, right? It's like, you don't have to, I wouldn't have a situation where the offshoot DC movies are like the quality films, and then the other ones are just like you trying to copy other studios and just, not having your priorities straight. That would be an unfortunate division between the two DC brands. All right, so anyway, that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day, of course, is about another director-writer, Drew Goddard, who landed the X-Force deal. Yay! This is the great choice. He's so good. I'm such a big Drew Goddard fan. He is incredibly talented. Now, of course, he did Cabin in the Woods. He's Joss Whedon's discovery, or at least Joss Whedon helped put him on the map. But while Cabin in the Woods is good, and he was associated with Daredevil until, remember, he went and got the Sony deal for Sinister Six, and then they kicked him off Daredevil. So, but he's still kind of, he wrote an episode of The Defenders. He's an executive producer, but, I'm going to give him Daredevil because it's a win in his column, and I like Drew Goddard so much. And he fixed World War Z, did a fabulous job fixing that movie. But what really made me a big Drew Goddard fan was The Martian, because that is a brilliantly written script, adapting incredibly difficult material, because a lot of it was an interior monologue in the book, because it's just a guy by himself on Mars. And Drew Goddard, the lines in that movie are just spectacular, just really, really good, fabulous script. So that just made me a huge Drew Goddard fan. And I think Fox took a liking to him too, because now he's their guy. Martian was their movie, and now they're greenlit Bad Times at the El Royale, his super secretive project that he's not only writing but also returning to the director's chair for. He directed Cabin in the Woods, and that stars Chris Hemsworth, who was in Cabin in the Woods as well, and Jeff Bridges. Can't wait. And that's for Fox, and then now they've signed him to do X-Force. And I have no question that with Drew Goddard at the helm and at the computer to write it, it will be an absolutely amazing film. And funny, because The Martian was quite funny. But what I found also very interesting and quite telling about this announcement is they said that this will be a team led by Deadpool and Cable. And I was like, oh, okay, who's going to be on the team? I would love to see Marrow on the team, teased in the first Deadpool film. Maybe Vanessa could come together as Copycat finally, and we could see her. But speaking of the ladies of X-Force, and there's a lot of, they have a similar character to Wolfsbane on there, like another she-wolf, and they have Boom Boom, very famous character. But of course, the most famous female member of X-Force is Domino. And I was shocked, especially considering the fact she's in Deadpool 2, that she wasn't mentioned in the announcement. And it made me wonder if maybe because of the tragic death of her stunt double, professional motorcycle racer S.J. Harris, but new to the stunt business individual, and there's a big controversy over whether or not that was the true cause of her death, if maybe that they're going to unfortunately sideline Zazie Beetz, and they just are like, you know what, let's not talk about Zazie Beetz because she unfortunately leads to a very difficult conversation. Like, for instance, it was rumored before that tragic death that Deadpool 2 was going to have a major presence at New York Comic Con, and they would debut their first trailer, etc. But now, nothing. No panel, no, they're not showing up. And I was talking to somebody about that the other day, and they said, you know, it might be because of the S.J. Harris situation. They don't want to answer any questions about that. It's just how The Walking Dead is kind of like, you know what? We're going to take, we're going to hold back a little bit. So I think it'll be interesting to see how Deadpool 2 takes shape moving forward, and just how much of a presence Domino has in the promotional campaign for the film. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. Now, the viewer question comes from Lucas Colantoni, who kept asking this and remembered the squeaky wheel gets the grease, so here's some grease. All right, so Lucas Colantoni says, hello, Grace. Love the show and all your insight. My question is all business, as I am a finance major in school. Love it, but a film critic at heart. I was wondering how film budgets work. Do the directors team pitching the movie to the studios also pitch a budget for the project, or do they display their ideas and the studio comes up with a budget they think is fair and worth the risk? Obviously, there would be negotiating and maybe even some bidding wars between studios depending on the project, but I don't know if there was a team of accountants and financial planners helping the creators craft a budget for the tech, effects, talent, locations, etc. Or is that all something that the studios do? Here's hoping the squeaky wheel gets the grease and my question is picked. Fingers crossed. And Lucas has been leaving this on a number of videos for the past week or so I'm happy to finally pick it. Well, right off the bat, they've been making movies for a long time, and just like they can kind of peg the box office, they can kind of peg how much a movie costs just by reading it, not including the salary of talent. That is something a little bit different. But if you look at a movie, I think right away you'd be like, okay, I can kind of ballpark how much this is going to be. And sometimes that's a selling point. Sometimes when you're pitching a movie to studios, you say, this will be so cheap, it'll only be $5 million, right? Like, come on, you can make this. I think that's the only time the budget would enter the discussion, if it would, or if you felt it, you were willing to do it on the cheap, right? Because for the most part, again, everybody in the room is aware of the size budget that would be needed to make the film that's being discussed. Even if you haven't seen a script, you just have, sometimes when you have the talent attached, and maybe that's an idea how you start to see the budget come together, because they package a lot of times the writer director, the idea, and the talent. Because a lot of times these things are now packaged by agencies, and they go to the studio and they say, would you like to make this movie that we've already put together? It's unlike the studio system days where the studio would package things. So when you look at it, and they would say, and the agency says this is what you would need to pay all the talent, and they go, okay, and then I think this movie would cost X number of dollars on top of that, and that's what we're looking at here. And then I'm sure there's some negotiating where they're like, well, I'll pay you this much, or I want to pay your talent a little bit less, but I'll give them part of the back, the back end. Like for instance, Warner Brothers kept that down to just $35 million. Pretty high though for a horror film, considering how much Jason Blum spends on them. So that's the discussion. But when it comes to actually putting the budget together, that's one of the reasons I wanted to answer this question, is that there's an actual individual who's responsible for that, and that is the unit production manager. A UPM comes onto a project very early in pre-production, and sometimes pre-pitch if you need the budget for the pitch, especially an independent film, and they'll put the budget together based on the script. They don't factor in things like the salary for the stars and the top of the the behind the camera top talent like the writer and the director, etc. Well, the writer, of course, has already been paid, but that's what a unit production manager does. And so they come on very early and they put the budget together. So at the end, it's all about a push and pull. And at the end of the day, what it costs to make the movie correctly. and also what the studio feels, of course, would allow them for the maximum possible return, both in terms of what they think the box office will be and how much they expect to have to spend to advertise it. So it's a pretty straightforward thing. I don't think it's a big part of the negotiating process, to be honest with you, because again, it's so obvious when you read the material and when you talk about what level talent you're looking for, you know what the ballpark of the numbers is, right? You're like, okay, if I want to spend like 10 million on an actor, or if I want to spend 20, and you can get a pretty decent name, especially if it's a woman, for about under 10, like around 5 million, unfortunately, because they don't get paid very much these days. I mean, a lot of the salaries you see are because of back end. So I think that's just the situation as it comes together. And Lucas, I wanted you to know and everybody to know what a unit production manager is. Budgeting movies is actually very interesting. It's a whole process, and I encourage you, if you're interested in it, they do have books on it, and you can find movie budgets online, and they're really interestingly itemized. And by the way, on a side note, just if you're curious, one of the most interesting things about movie budgets is that the real cost comes from unions. You have to they're very expensive. If you're on location, it's incredibly expensive to house everyone, feed them. You have to pay for everyone's transportation to and from set. Even when you're shooting not on location, when you're shooting, in New York or California, you have to still pay for people's transportation. You have to feed everyone. You have to feed crew. That's where like a lot of, you'd be surprised at where a lot of unexpected costs come from. So if you're interested in filmmaking, you should definitely read a couple of budgets, because it'll give you a better perspective of what movies cost, why, and also just the inner workings of a set, how expensive it is, how many people are needed. It takes a village to make a movie, and you got to feed that village, and you got to give them a place to sleep, and you got to pay them overtime, and also that's the other thing the budget has to take into account. It's turned into a little mini lesson on budgeting, but you have to take into account the union hours, rules for hours, how long you can work. You also have to take into account how much time you can give everybody off. So a unit production manager also kind of needs the schedule for the movie, the potential shooting schedule, if they're really going to get into it, to decide, okay, well, how many days do we need to shoot? Which days are at this location? How is it going to take to get to that location? And also you have to bunch shoot days together in terms of talent availability and how long you want to pay the talent. Let's say you have a supporting role, but you're like, I only want to pay someone for 2 weeks of work. So that actor has to shoot all their scenes as close together as possible, because the name of the game is having people have the least possible commitment, except for like the biggest stars who are in the entire movie. Because you want them in and out so you can keep the costs down, not only for their salary, but also to feed them, again, to house them and to transport them to the set. Also, you need to have a trailer for them. And sometimes, according to, their deal, you sometimes have to pay the salary for their makeup and hair, etc. And they have special requests for food, and also, luxuries on set. It's a very interesting situation. So get your hands on a couple of budgets, and do yourself a favor to get a really good perspective. Get your hands on budgets for different size movies so that you have an idea of the difference. All right, so it'll give you, I think it'll be very enlightening. All right, so thank you for your question, Lucas. Thank you everybody for tuning in today. Please write down below today's top 3 stories, Lucas's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered on Monday, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.